This week's Piltch Point with Avram Piltch is proudly powered by PureVPN. If you want to hide your browsing history from Google and Facebook and your ISP and everybody else, one of the best ways to do that is with a VPN. And right now, PureVPN has a deal. If you do a 2-year contract, you will get $3.33 a month, which is a really great deal because on top of obfuscating your browsing, you also get the ability to report that you're somewhere else, so you can use services that may be region locked against you. And it works everywhere, whether you want to use it on Windows or Mac, Android, iOS, Linux. Tons of hardware has it built in as well, and you can find out all about the service and the deal that's running right now by going to piltchpoint.live/purevpn. So Avram, I know we've talked about this a little bit before, a couple of times, because it's one of your favorite products, but we have an anniversary this week.
Yes. So February 29th marked the 8th birthday of the Raspberry Pi, of the original Raspberry Pi, which, by the way, you could say it marked the second birthday because it's leap year. But let's just say let's just say 8 years, because if you were a child and you were born on February 29th, 2012, you would be in first grade. So, I mean, second grade. You would not be in nursery school. So anyway, I'm sure our repeat audience is very familiar with me talking about the miracle of technology that is the Raspberry Pi, the $35 computer, or actually available for as little as $5 if you get the Pi Zero, that is good enough to run a robot or run a web server or even turn into one of these. Anyway, arcade machine. But the 8th anniversary is a good opportunity to reflect on some of the things that this groundbreaking single board computer has become and how it started. So I put up an article this week about 8 things you might not know about Raspberry Pi on its 8th anniversary. One is that the original reason that this was developed is that Eben Upton, who was the founder of Raspberry Pi and is not currently the CEO of Raspberry Pi Trading, where they make these, was a professor at Cambridge University's computer science program, and he said that they weren't getting enough applicants anymore, and he wanted to inspire more kids to get into computer science. So he had the idea that they would maybe build an inexpensive computer that kids could hack, could play around with, hack around with, and that they'd make 1,000 units. But once the level of people saw the level of interest that there was, they decided they couldn't just make 1,000 units. They were going to mass manufacture them. And now, 8 years later, there have been 31 million Raspberry Pis sold. The 31 million includes, in 2019, the Raspberry Pi 4, the latest model came out, that so far has sold 6.6 million units, and 2/3 of those have been the model with the 4 gigabytes, the 4 gigabytes of RAM, which is the highest end model.
I'm sorry. Hold on. So they intended to make 1,000 devices, period.
Correct.
And yet,
correct.
This generation has sold how many?
6.6 million. That's the current fourth generation.
Yeah.
Fourth generation.
Slightly different.
Yeah, well, 31 million in total, and a good chunk of those are not to kids. In fact, even though these are great for kids to use for learning, I set up one for my son on the TV, and he's using it to learn how to program video games using Python. Um, the the fact is that there are half of the clients for Raspberry Pi are industrial. That means they're using them in manufacturing and around in businesses where they really need them, or building them into other products. So Raspberry Pi is a lot more than a kid's device. It's a lot more than a hobbyist's device. Um, it's and I think the real magic isn't just that it's inexpensive and low power, but I think the real magic comes from these, which are the GPIO pins. So you have 40 GPIO pins, and they can be used to attach a variety of different accessories and go into any kind of lights and motors that you want. So people use them to build robots. People use them to build all kinds of sensor arrays. People take a whole bunch of these, as we saw last year, and there were 1,000. There was a supercomputer cluster with, I think, 1,040 of these.
Uh-huh.
I think those were Raspberry Pi 3Bs. But um, those are some of the things that people have done with it. So yes, it's a lot more than 1,000. And one of the things that Upton told me was originally they were going to just make them themselves, the folks in the Pi Foundation, because they were only going to make a few units, and then they decide no, they can't do their own manufacturing, and that's when they went and got partners to do the manufacturing. Um, Another fact on the 8th birthday is that there have been, depending on how you want to count it, at least 18 different models of Raspberry Pi introduced in the last 8 years. These range from the original, which was the Raspberry Pi 1B, that had a 700 megahertz single core processor and 256 megs of RAM, up to the Raspberry Pi 4B, which came out in 2019 and has up to 4 gigs of RAM and a 1.5 gigahertz quad core processor. Um, so, and what's amazing is the price on these has actually dropped relative to inflation. So, $35 got you the original Raspberry Pi in 2012. Today, $35 gets you. As of this week, they actually cut the price on the 2 gigabyte model, the 2 gigabyte Raspberry Pi 4B. So $35 and $2012 is equivalent to $39.80 today. So you've actually the price of it has actually shrunk by staying the same, while obviously what you get for that money has gone up a great deal. Um, Now, not only will you find Raspberry Pis in local electronics stores and online, but you'll find two of them on the International Space Station, where they are known as AstroPis. And through the European Space Agency, students can actually participate in contests where they get to have their code run in space.
Now that's cool.
Which is, which is, which is. Oh, I'm sorry. I last year. Okay, I got the number wrong. Last year, the company sold 6.1 million units in total, and 2 million of them were Pi 4B. Um, and of the 2 million, two-thirds were 4 gigabyte model. Now that's through the end of 2019, so probably selling more this year. Some other things that people may not know about the Raspberry Pi is that there's no power button, and they probably never will be a power button, because uh, the Pi Foundation believes a lot of people want to build these into systems where they put their own power switch, where they put their own power switches to it and attach it to the pins. So the traditional method of turning them on and off is to plug and unplug them. Of course, they recommend that you run shutdown in the operating system, because these run any of a variety of operating systems, although most people use the official OS, which is called Raspbian and is a flavor of Linux. So there's no power button. People may also not know that all Raspberry Pis, or at least all recent ones, are overclockable, and it's built right into the operating system. So we've been able to get this up to all the way up to 2.147 gigahertz uh, just by attaching a little fan um, and and upping the voltage. Uh, so there's just a ridiculous amount of uses as we look at what this product means today and what it and what it has meant over the last 8 years. And as this keeps developing, it keeps getting to be a better and better computer. So while I still wouldn't recommend that most people use this as their main computer, it is decent enough to watch videos, to surf the web. Um, if you have a lot of tabs open, you could regret it because even with 4 gigabytes of RAM, that's not fantastic, and you're still loading everything off of the main storage on these is a micro SD card. So, that can only be so fast. It's not exactly like uh, using an NVMe SSD in your laptop or desktop. Um, but the the influence of the product continues to grow, and as we see more revisions, the number of use cases grows. And while there have been a number of competitors or imitators, such as the Orange Pi and the Banana Pi, um, nothing has really come close to matching the Raspberry Pi. Not only because of what it provides for the money, and because of the fantastic build quality of them, but also because of just the really strong community that is behind them, that's developing software, that's answering your questions, um, that's that's being teachers teaching things in school. There last year they told me 250,000 kids a week take part in Raspberry Pi programs, like at school education programs around the world. So um, you know just obviously a lot to celebrate after 8 years. This is my passion and one that my son and I do a lot with. And I definitely encourage folks to check out the Raspberry Pi 8th birthday article on tomshardware.com, but also all the links to how you get started and make the most of this device.
And like you said, it's a device that you can make a lot of. We've talked
Yeah,
about
I
everything
mean,
from a web server through an arcade machine. That's a pretty wide range of projects.
yeah, so at CES this year, I saw a really awesome Raspberry Pi powered robot. I think it was named Ricci. And he could go, it was like a torso, and two hands, and he could go and like grab things and like play chess and manipulate stuff, right? And I said, "Oh, what board are you using to power this robot? Like what's?" They're like, "Oh, a Raspberry Pi 4." And they pulled up the robot's like guts were covered by like a little t-shirt. They pulled up the robot shirts, and there it was. There it was. One of these powering this really complicated robot. So, it's just amazing. And, that's a good example of an industrial client. If they sell a bunch of those, they're going to have to use this to power it. Granted, I think they were telling me it was like something like $12,000. So they spent $35 on this, uh, but to be fair, to the company that makes it, like this is just the brain, but the really hard part is the things that you attach to it, right? So you have to build human-like arms with fingers that can grab stuff. I
Right.
mean, that's really complicated. Fabricating that. So, the real difficulty and the real innovation comes with, how to physically make the things that you control with this. It's a really powerful processor for the money and the power consumption, but ultimately, what you attach to it is what makes it really special.
For sure. Well, I always love hearing about Raspberry Pi stuff, and the space bit, I had no idea. So that's
Yeah,
really cool.
they're Raspberry Pi ones, so that are
Fascinating.
on the ISS, and they run an annual contest called Project Zero. I think only students in the EU get to participate. Um, but you could definitely look it up. I wonder if at some point they're going to upgrade those to newer model. But that that's that's one of the many things that Raspberry Pi does.
Well, that's definitely a cool thing, and to be able to be the person who can say my software ran on the ISS. that's that's a cool brag right there.
Yeah, it is.
Very cool. Well, as always, Avram, thank you for talking about this, because that's some cool stuff right there, and I look forward to what we're talking about next.